With respect, that is not what he said. The sentence stopped every conversation in the private dining room. Simone Carter stood near the wall with a silver coffee pot in one hand, her black apron tied neatly around her waist, while 8 people with expensive titles turned to stare at her. Grant Mercer, the restaurant's general manager, looked as though the waitress had just stepped across a line no one else could see. At the center of the table sat Claire Whitmore, the 43-year-old billionaire chief executive officer of Whitmore Global Technologies, her expression controlled but unmistakably tense. Across from her, Hiroshi Takeda sat in silence. Only moments earlier, the 67-year-old Japanese businessman had spoken quietly in Japanese, and Daniel Ross, one of Claire's senior executives, had offered his interpretation. "Mr. Takeda believes we have moved too slowly," Daniel had explained. "He is questioning whether the partnership should continue." The temperature of the room seemed to change. Claire had spent months building a relationship with Takeda Precision Systems. This dinner was not a contract signing, but trust mattered here, and trust could be damaged long before lawyers ever opened a document. Claire responded carefully, defending her company's commitment and explaining that Whitmore Global was prepared to move faster. Hiroshi's expression had tightened. Then he answered in Japanese again. Daniel began translating, but Simone felt something cold settle in her stomach. He had it wrong. Not every word. Something more dangerous than that. He had the meaning wrong. Grant caught Simone watching. "Coffee, then give them privacy," he whispered. Simone should have left. She knew that. Her job was to serve the table, refill water glasses, remember dietary requests, and disappear before powerful people noticed the person carrying the tray. But she also knew what Hiroshi had actually said. He was not accusing Claire of moving too slowly. He was warning her that she was moving too quickly, treating trust as if it were another company asset that could be acquired on a schedule. Claire had answered the opposite concern. Now Hiroshi believed she had not understood him at all. Simone took one step toward the door. Then Hiroshi spoke again. His voice remained calm, but Simone heard the disappointment beneath the words. Daniel opened his mouth. She knew that if he translated the sentence through the same misunderstanding, the conversation would move even farther from the truth. "With respect," Simone said, "that is not what he said." Silence. Grant turned sharply. "Excuse me." Simone's heart beat hard, but her voice did not. "Mr. Takeda is not saying the company is moving too slowly." Daniel stared at her. "And you know that how?" Grant stepped closer. "Simone, return to the dining room." Claire raised one hand. Grant stopped. The billionaire looked directly at the waitress. "You understood him?" Simone glanced at Hiroshi. Then she answered him in Japanese. The change in his face was immediate. Surprise first, then attention. He replied, faster this time, using the natural rhythm of someone no longer simplifying his words for a room that could not follow him. Simone answered without hesitation. Daniel's confidence disappeared. Grant stood motionless. Claire leaned forward, studying the woman everyone had treated as part of the furniture. When Simone turned back to her, the room was waiting. "You understood the words," Simone said carefully. "But I think everyone missed what he was trying not to say directly." Claire Whitmore, a woman accustomed to being the most powerful person at any table, said nothing. And for the first time that evening, every executive in the room stopped looking at the billionaire and started listening to the waitress. 3 hours earlier, Simone Carter had been carrying 6 glasses of sparkling water through a crowded dining room, while Grant Mercer reminded her that important guests were arriving. Simone had worked at the restaurant for nearly 4 years, long enough to know that Grant used the word important differently, depending on the price of a person's suit. To Simone, every table mattered. The couple celebrating their 40th anniversary mattered. The exhausted mother sharing dessert with her teenage daughter mattered. The businessman eating alone while pretending not to check his phone every 30 seconds mattered. Grant, however, had spent the afternoon preparing the private dining room for Claire Whitmore. Fresh flowers had been replaced twice. Wine glasses had been inspected beneath the light. Every server assigned to the room had received instructions so detailed that Simone wondered whether anyone planned to enjoy the meal. "Be present, but invisible," Grant told the staff. Simone almost smiled. Invisible was something she understood. At 30 years old, she had become very good at standing close enough to hear people discuss the world while assuming she knew nothing about it. Customers sometimes explained basic business terms in front of her. Executives left reports open beside their plates. Once, a man had spent 20 minutes describing international markets to his date, while Simone quietly corrected his Japanese pronunciation in her head. She never embarrassed him. There was no reason to. Simone had lived in Yokohama for 3 years when her mother joined an international education program. At first, she had learned Japanese because she hated feeling lost. Then she learned because she loved the language. She listened to classmates, neighbors, shopkeepers, teachers, and families. She discovered that understanding vocabulary was only the beginning. Meaning lived in pauses. Context. Tone. What people chose not to say. Years later, back in the United States, Simone enrolled in an international business program at a community college. She imagined a career connecting people across cultures. Then her mother became ill, bills accumulated, and Simone reduced her classes before eventually stepping away from school. The restaurant job that was supposed to be temporary became rent, groceries, and stability. She did not resent honest work. She resented the assumption that honest work revealed the full measure of the person doing it. Once, during a staff meeting, Simone suggested that the restaurant create brief cultural service guides for major international events held in San Francisco. Grant had barely looked up. "Just focus on your tables," he said. So she did. She learned regular customers' preferences. She noticed when guests needed help before they asked. She trained new servers, even though training was not in her title. And she kept studying Japanese on her own because some parts of a person should not be abandoned simply because nobody is paying attention. At 5:40 that evening, Grant entered the service station holding a printed seating plan. "Whitmore party arrives at 7, he said. "Private room. High priority. No unnecessary conversation." Simone took the paper he handed her. One name caught her attention. Hiroshi Takeda. She recognized Takeda Precision Systems immediately. She had read about the company months earlier in an international business journal at the public library. "Is Mr. Takeda coming from Japan?" she asked. Grant looked at her. "Why?" "Just curious." "Do not be." He took the seating plan back. "Serve the table. Let the executives handle the conversation." Simone nodded and returned to polishing glasses. She did not tell him she knew who Hiroshi Takeda was. She did not tell him she understood the language he would speak. She did not tell him that sometimes the person carrying the coffee could understand a room better than the people controlling it. At 7:18, Claire Whitmore walked through the front doors. 40 minutes later, Simone would say one sentence that changed the entire dinner. But at that moment, Grant saw only a waitress adjusting her apron. And Simone had learned long ago that being underestimated was often quietest just before someone discovered how wrong they had been. Claire Whitmore arrived at 7:18 without the entourage Grant had expected. She entered with Daniel Ross and 2 senior executives, dressed in a dark navy suit that was elegant without demanding attention. She did not need clothing to announce power. People recognized her before Grant reached the front door. At 43, Claire had built Whitmore Global Technologies into a company operating across North America, Europe, and Asia. But tonight she was not here to make a public appearance. She was here because Hiroshi Takeda had agreed to dinner. That distinction mattered. Takeda Precision Systems was not the largest company Claire had ever approached, but its technology was respected across the industry, and Hiroshi had spent decades protecting the independence of the family business he had built. Whitmore Global wanted a strategic partnership. Hiroshi wanted to know whether Claire wanted a partner or simply another company she could control. No contract would be signed over dinner. No billion-dollar decision depended on dessert. But relationships could move forward in a dining room, and they could also quietly end there. Hiroshi arrived 12 minutes later with one advisor. Claire greeted him in Japanese. Simone, standing several feet away with a tray of water glasses, nearly looked up. Claire's pronunciation was strong. Not perfect, but practiced and confident. That surprised Simone more than it should have. Powerful people were often underestimated too, just in different ways. The dinner began smoothly. Claire and Hiroshi moved between English and Japanese, while Daniel occasionally helped clarify technical language. The professional interpreter who had been scheduled to attend had canceled earlier that afternoon because of a family emergency, but Claire had chosen not to postpone. She knew enough Japanese to manage ordinary conversation, and Hiroshi spoke English well enough to meet her halfway. For the first hour, that was enough. They discussed manufacturing standards, research, long-term investment, and the challenges of expanding without weakening quality. Simone entered and left quietly, replacing plates and refilling glasses. Grant watched from near the door, making certain the service remained flawless. Then the conversation changed. Hiroshi stopped discussing technology and began talking about his father, who had started with a small workshop and 6 employees. He spoke about responsibility, continuity, and the fear that growth could erase the values that made a company worth growing. Claire listened carefully. "I understand," she said in Japanese. "Whitmore Global can provide the resources to accelerate what you have built." Simone felt the first shift. Hiroshi smiled politely, but the warmth disappeared from his eyes. He answered with a phrase that was grammatically simple and culturally heavier than Daniel seemed to realize. Daniel leaned toward Claire. "He says he is concerned that we have not moved quickly enough to prove our commitment." Simone paused beside the coffee service. That was not what Hiroshi meant. Not really. He was saying that Claire's urgency itself worried him. To him, the pressure to accelerate sounded less like commitment and more like acquisition. Claire responded to Daniel's interpretation. "Then we can increase the timeline. We are prepared to move immediately if that demonstrates seriousness." Hiroshi became very still. Simone looked toward Daniel. He did not notice. Grant did. He crossed the room and spoke quietly near her shoulder. "Do not hover." Simone moved toward the door. Behind her, Hiroshi answered again in Japanese, this time more carefully. Daniel began explaining that he was questioning Claire's willingness to move fast enough. Simone stopped. The misunderstanding was no longer a small crack. It was becoming the conversation. Grant saw her turn. "Simone." His voice carried a warning. "Your job is to serve the table, not join it." She lowered her eyes and took another step. Then Hiroshi spoke one more sentence. Simone heard disappointment beneath his restraint. She knew exactly what would happen if Daniel translated it through the same assumption. Claire would defend a position Hiroshi had never challenged. Hiroshi would hear another answer to a question he had never asked. And 2 intelligent people would leave the room believing the other had refused to listen. Simone tightened her hand around the coffee pot. She had spent years being told to stay in her place. But sometimes staying in your place meant standing still while everyone else walked farther from the truth. Simone stopped before she reached the door. Behind her, Daniel was already beginning his explanation. "Mr. Takeda is saying that if we cannot demonstrate greater urgency, he may need to reconsider whether our goals are aligned." Hiroshi looked at him, then at Claire. The disappointment on his face deepened. Simone turned around. Grant noticed immediately. "Simone," he said quietly. "Outside." She should have obeyed. Every practical instinct told her to protect the job that paid her rent. But the truth was now sitting in the middle of the table, being translated into something it had never been. "With respect," Simone said, "that is not what he said." Daniel stopped. Grant stared at her. Claire slowly turned in her chair. "Excuse me?" Grant asked. "Mr. Takeda is not asking you to move faster," Simone said. "He is asking whether moving faster is the problem." Daniel's expression hardened. "I speak Japanese." "I did not say you did not." "Then perhaps you should let me handle the conversation." Grant stepped forward. Simone, return to the main dining room." Claire lifted one hand. "Wait." The room went still. Claire looked directly at Simone. "You understood him?" Simone felt the weight of every eye on her. "Yes." "How much?" "All of it." Daniel gave a short, disbelieving breath. Hiroshi said something in Japanese before anyone else could speak. Simone turned toward him. His question was simple. "Where did you learn?" She answered in Japanese, explaining that she had lived in Yokohama for 3 years and had continued studying after returning to the United States. Hiroshi's eyebrows lifted. Then he asked another question, faster and more natural. Simone answered. He followed with a phrase containing an expression that rarely appeared in textbooks. Simone understood that too. The exchange lasted less than a minute, but by the time it ended, no one in the room was looking at her apron anymore. Hiroshi leaned back and regarded her with open curiosity. Claire remained silent. Daniel did not. Speaking the language does not necessarily mean understanding the business context. Simone nodded. You are right. The answer seemed to surprise him. I am not claiming to understand every part of your negotiation, she continued. I am saying the meaning of Mr. Takeda's concern has been reversed. Claire looked at Hiroshi and addressed him in Japanese. Is she correct? Hiroshi answered slowly, choosing his words with care. Simone listened. Claire understood most of the sentence. Daniel understood the vocabulary, but Simone heard the distinction that had caused the entire problem. He is not rejecting the partnership, she said, and he is not asking you to prove commitment by moving faster. He is concerned that your company sees speed as proof of seriousness. Claire's expression changed. Simone continued carefully. He believes trust should come before expansion. When you offered to accelerate the timeline, he heard confirmation of the thing he was worried about. No one moved. Claire looked back at Hiroshi. This time, she did not rush to answer. She asked him, in Japanese, whether Simone had represented his meaning fairly. Hiroshi looked at Simone, then at Claire. Yes, he said in English. One word. Enough. Grant's face had gone pale. Daniel looked down at the notes beside his plate. Claire folded her hands on the table. Then I owe you an apology, she told Hiroshi. I was answering the words I thought I heard instead of the concern you were actually expressing. Hiroshi studied her. The tension did not disappear, but something in the room opened again. Claire then turned toward Simone. You said I understood the words, but missed what he was trying not to say directly. Simone nodded. Yes. Then tell me what I am still missing. Grant looked at the waitress. Daniel looked at the billionaire. Hiroshi looked between them. Simone stood with a coffee pot in her hand and an apron around her waist, suddenly holding the attention of people who had not known her name an hour earlier. But she did not smile. She did not celebrate, because being heard was not the same as being right, and she understood that the next thing she said mattered even more than the sentence that had stopped the room. Simone set the coffee pot down on a side table before answering. Her hands were steady now, but she understood the danger of the moment. People often mistook fluency for authority. She had corrected a misunderstanding. That did not make her a negotiator, and she refused to pretend otherwise. I can explain what I heard, she said, but I cannot tell you what decision to make. Claire studied her for a moment. Then she reached toward the empty chair beside the table and pulled it back slightly. Fair enough. Sit down and help me understand. Grant's expression changed instantly. Miss Whitmore, I am sure we can arrange for someone from the staff to take over Simone's tables. Claire looked at him. Please do. The answer was calm, but final. Simone remained standing. I should be clear about something first. Daniel looked almost offended that she was still speaking. Claire did not. Go ahead. I can clarify the language and the context as I understand it. Mr. Takeda should speak for himself about his intentions. Hiroshi nodded before Claire could respond. Good, he said in English. Simone sat. The black apron remained tied around her waist. She did not suddenly become an executive because a billionaire had pulled out a chair. She was still a waitress. She was also the person in the room who had heard the distinction everyone else had missed. Claire turned toward Hiroshi and spoke more slowly in Japanese. This time, she did not defend her company. She asked a question. What would moving with respect look like to you? Hiroshi answered at length. Simone listened without interrupting. When he finished, Claire looked toward her. He is not asking you to slow everything down, Simone explained. He is saying that the relationship should not be forced to move at the same speed as the transaction. Claire's eyes narrowed slightly in concentration. What is the difference? Simone glanced at Hiroshi. He gestured for her to continue. A transaction can have deadlines. Trust cannot be scheduled the same way. He wants to know whether his company will still have a voice after the partnership begins, not just before it is signed. The room became quiet again, but this silence felt different. It was no longer the silence of embarrassment. It was the silence of people finally listening. Claire turned back to Hiroshi. Then I have been trying to prove commitment in the wrong way. Hiroshi gave a small nod. Perhaps, he said. Claire almost smiled. That sounds kinder than yes. Hiroshi smiled too. The tension eased. Daniel closed his notebook and reopened it on a clean page. To his credit, he did not argue again. He began asking Simone to clarify phrases when he was uncertain. Simone answered when she could and said, I do not know, when she could not. Hiroshi noticed that. So did Claire. Over the next 20 minutes, the conversation returned to the partnership, but the tone had changed. No one announced that the deal was saved. Nothing was signed. There were still questions about control, governance, and long-term strategy. But the conversation was honest again. When dinner finally ended, Hiroshi stood and thanked Claire for listening. Then he turned to Simone and spoke in Japanese. Most people think speaking another language means knowing different words. Simone smiled. Sometimes it means knowing when the words are not the whole message. Hiroshi nodded. After he left, Grant immediately approached. Simone, we need to discuss what happened tonight. Claire looked toward him. Yes, she said. We do. Grant stopped. Claire rose from her chair and turned to Simone. How long have you worked here? Almost 4 years. Claire glanced at the apron, then back at her face. And in 4 years, nobody knew you could do that. Before Simone could answer, Grant said, She is an excellent waitress. Claire's expression became still. I can see what her job is. Then she looked directly at him. I am asking why that is the only thing anyone here ever bothered to learn about her. Grant looked as though he wanted to answer quickly, but Claire's question left no safe place for a polished response. Our employees have many skills outside their assigned roles, he said finally. We cannot know everything about everyone. Simone almost looked away. It was the kind of answer that sounded reasonable until you remembered how often she had tried to contribute. Claire did not argue. She turned to Simone instead. Did anyone ever ask? Simone considered the question. Not really. Grant folded his hands. Simone has always been valued as a member of the service team. That was not what she asked, Simone said quietly. Grant looked at her. Claire noticed. What did you study? Claire asked. International business. Where? Community college, after I returned from Japan. Did you finish? No, Simone did not soften the answer. My mother became ill. I reduced my classes, then stopped. The restaurant was supposed to be temporary. Claire nodded. No pity crossed her face, and Simone appreciated that more than sympathy. How long were you in Yokohama? 3 years. And you kept studying Japanese after you returned? Yes. Why? Simone glanced toward the empty chair where Hiroshi had been sitting. Because losing a job title is one thing. Losing part of yourself because nobody pays you to use it is another. Claire became very still. Daniel, standing near the table, looked up from his notes. Grant said nothing. Tonight, Claire continued, you corrected a translation made by one of my senior executives. I corrected one misunderstanding. You are making a distinction. It matters. Claire's expression softened slightly. Explain. Simone took a breath. Daniel understands Japanese. He also understands your company better than I do. I happen to recognize what Mr. Takeda meant in that moment. That does not make me more qualified than Daniel at everything else. Daniel looked at her with surprise. Simone continued. If I pretend one correct interpretation makes me an expert in an entire business relationship, then I am making the same mistake everyone made tonight. I would be assuming too much. For the first time, Daniel smiled. That is fair. Claire looked from him back to Simone. Do you always talk yourself out of opportunities? Only the ones I have not earned. Grant shifted uncomfortably. Claire walked toward the window overlooking the lights of San Francisco. I have an international client relations fellowship, she said. 12 months. Paid. Competitive. Language assessment, case analysis, interviews, and rotations across several teams. Simone listened without moving. Are you offering me a place? No, Claire turned back toward her. I am offering you the chance to apply. Grant seemed surprised. Simone was not offended. In fact, something in her shoulders relaxed. Would my application receive special treatment because of tonight? It would receive attention because I am telling the program director to make sure it is reviewed. Selection is not my decision. And if I am not qualified, then you will not be selected. Simone nodded slowly. Good. Claire raised an eyebrow. Good. I do not want to spend the next 10 years wondering whether I earned the opportunity or whether a billionaire felt inspired over dinner. Daniel looked down, hiding a smile. Claire did not. She laughed once, quietly. You are direct. It saves time. Mr. Takeda might disagree with that philosophy. Simone smiled. Only if I confuse speed with trust. Claire's expression changed. She had heard the lesson. Grant looked between them. Realizing the waitress he had repeatedly told to focus on her tables was discussing international business with one of the most powerful executives in the country. But Simone felt no triumph over him. Being underestimated had cost her enough already. She did not need revenge to prove the cost was real. Claire reached into her bag, removed a business card, and placed it on the table. The application closes Friday. Simone looked at the card but did not pick it up immediately. That gives me 4 days. Yes. Not much time. No, Simone finally took it. Then I should probably finish my shift. Claire smiled. Probably. Simone retied the apron that had loosened during the evening and walked back toward the dining room. The apron had not changed. The The woman wearing it had not changed either. Only the room had finally learned enough to realize it had never known her at all. Simone submitted the application at 11:43 on Thursday night, 17 minutes before she had promised herself she would stop revising it. Claire's business card sat beside her laptop, but Simone had not used the private number printed beneath the company address. She did not ask for advice. She did not ask anyone to move her application forward. If the door was truly open, she wanted to know whether she could walk through it on her own. 2 weeks later, an email invited her to the first assessment. The language test was harder than she expected. Simone understood conversation easily, but the written section included formal business terminology she had not used in years. She left the testing center knowing she had missed several answers. The case analysis was worse. Candidates were given a fictional international partnership facing delays, cultural misunderstandings, and competing financial priorities. Simone knew what she wanted to say, but she struggled to organize the numbers as quickly as candidates with recent business experience. For one terrible hour, she wondered whether Grant had been right to see only a waitress. Then she caught herself. Failing one test would not make Grant right. Passing one test would not make him wrong about everything. A person was larger than one judgment, including her own. 3 days later, Simone advanced to the interview round. 26 candidates had applied. 12 remained. Some spoke 3 languages. Several held graduate degrees. One had worked overseas for 6 years. Simone sat in the waiting area wearing the best navy suit she owned and understood something important. The dinner had made people notice her. It had not made her the most qualified person in the building. During the interview, a panel asked why she believed she belonged in international client relations. Simone could have told the dramatic story. Instead, she said, "I know what it feels like to misunderstand a room, and I know what it feels like to be misunderstood by one. I have learned not to assume those are the same problem." A panelist asked about her unfinished degree. Simone answered honestly. Another asked about a weakness. "I have gaps in formal business training," she said. "I can improve those. What I cannot afford is pretending the gaps are not there." The final question came in Japanese through a video call. Hiroshi appeared on the screen. Simone blinked in surprise. He smiled. "Do you speak Japanese?" he asked. "Or do you understand people?" Simone remembered the restaurant, the coffee pot, the silence after she corrected the room. "Language helps," she answered. "Listening matters more. But listening does not mean assuming I understand someone simply because I know their language." Hiroshi's smile widened. "Good." He ended the call without telling her whether she had passed. A week later, Simone was clearing table 14 when her phone vibrated in her apron pocket. She ignored it until her break. The email was short. She had been selected for the fellowship. Simone read it twice. Then a third time. She sat alone in the employee break room, surrounded by lockers and the quiet hum of a vending machine, and covered her mouth with one hand. She had not ranked first on the financial analysis. She had ranked second in Japanese proficiency, but the panel had given her the highest evaluation in cross-cultural judgment and communication. She had not been chosen because Claire Whitmore had watched her rescue a conversation. She had been chosen because, when tested against people with stronger resumes and more polished credentials, she had shown that her experience carried value too. Grant found her 10 minutes later. "Everything all right?" Simone looked up. For a moment, she remembered every time he had told her to focus on her tables. Then she simply smiled. "I got the fellowship." Grant stood quietly. "Congratulations." It was not an apology. Not yet. But it was sincere. Simone nodded and returned to work. She still had 3 hours left in her shift, and table 14 needed their check. Opportunity had finally found her. But dignity required something more than being discovered. It required proving that she had never needed permission to have value in the first place. The fellowship began 6 weeks later, and on Simone's first morning at Whitmore Global Technologies, nobody handed her a miracle. They handed her a schedule. Her 12-month program included rotations through international client relations, partnership strategy, communications, and regional operations. The work was demanding. During her first month, Simone spent more time taking notes than speaking. She learned contract terminology she had never encountered in a restaurant. She studied financial reports after work and asked questions when acronyms blurred together. Some days, she left the office feeling capable. Other days, She rode the train home wondering whether everyone else had received instructions for a world she was still learning to enter. Claire did not rescue her from that discomfort. In fact, Simone rarely saw her. The billionaire chief executive officer had kept her promise. She had opened a door, then stepped away from the selection process. Simone appreciated that. She wanted mentorship, not protection. 3 months into the fellowship, Simone joined a meeting involving a European supplier and an American project team. The disagreement had nothing to do with Japanese. No one needed translation. Yet Simone noticed the same problem she had seen at the restaurant. Everyone was answering the words being spoken while ignoring the concern underneath them. This time, she did not interrupt immediately. She asked a question. The room slowed down. The supplier clarified what had actually been bothering them. A problem that had consumed 2 weeks became manageable in 20 minutes. Afterward, Simone's supervisor stopped her in the hallway. That was good. Simone smiled. The question? The listening. By the 6th month, she was trusted with more responsibility. She still made mistakes. Once, she prepared a briefing that was too detailed and buried the decision the team actually needed to make. Another time, she misunderstood a reporting process and had to redo 2 days of work. She corrected both without excuses. The woman who had once carried 6 dinner plates at a time knew something many offices forgot. Pride did not fix mistakes. Work did. Claire finally invited her to coffee near the end of the 7th month. How is the fellowship? She asked. Harder than serving table 14. Claire smiled. That sounds specific. Table 14 always wanted separate checks. Claire laughed. Then her expression became serious. Do you regret applying? Simone thought about it. No, but I am glad you did not give me a job that night. Why? Because I would have spent every difficult day wondering whether I belonged here. And now, Simone looked through the window at the city below. Now I know belonging is not the same as knowing everything. Claire nodded slowly. That took me longer to learn. Near the end of the fellowship, Simone was assigned to support a delegation visiting from Japan. Hiroshi Takeda was among them. When he saw her enter the conference room, he smiled. Their conversation began in Japanese, but this time Simone was not. Carrying coffee, she had prepared the briefing materials. She understood the agenda. She knew which questions belonged to her and which decisions belonged to people with greater authority. Hiroshi noticed the difference. You have learned a great deal, he told her. Simone smiled. Enough to know how much I still do not know. Hiroshi nodded approvingly. Later that afternoon, Simone received an invitation to interview for a permanent position as an international client relations associate. She read the message once and closed her laptop. No shock, no dramatic celebration, just a quiet breath. The opportunity was not guaranteed. There would be interviews, evaluations, and other candidates. That was exactly how she wanted it. Months earlier, a room full of powerful people had finally noticed that the waitress could speak Japanese. Now Simone was building something more difficult than a surprising moment. She was building a career that would remain valuable long after the room stopped being surprised. 1 year after the dinner that changed the direction of her life, Simone Carter sat at a business table in Tokyo and watched a young American server realize she had made a mistake. The server had brought the wrong tea service for one of the guests and immediately began apologizing, her face tightening with embarrassment. An executive near the end of the table sighed and looked at his watch. Simone recognized that expression. She had seen it hundreds of times from the other side of a tray. Before the moment could become larger than the mistake, Simone smiled at the server. It is all right. Thank you for fixing it. The young woman nodded, visibly relieved, and returned a few minutes later with the correct service. The meeting continued. No humiliation, no performance of power, just a problem corrected with dignity. Across the table, Claire Whitmore noticed. Simone was now a permanent international client relations associate at Whitmore Global Technologies. She had earned the position after completing the fellowship, 2 interviews, a written assessment, and a final evaluation. She had not been the strongest candidate in every category. Her financial analysis had improved, but others still had more experience. What separated Simone was her ability to recognize when a conversation was failing before the people inside it understood why. That evening, Hiroshi Takeda joined Claire, Simone, and several executives for dinner. The partnership between their companies had moved forward carefully over the previous year. It had taken longer than Claire originally expected. That no longer bothered her. Some things became stronger because nobody rushed them. The conversation moved naturally between English and Japanese. Simone participated when her role required it and listened when it did not. She no longer felt the need to prove that she belonged at the table. Belonging had become quieter than that. Near the end of dinner, Hiroshi raised his cup toward her. "You listen differently now," he said in Japanese. Simone smiled. "Better or worse?" "More patiently." "I will accept that." Claire understood enough to laugh. After the guests left, she and Simone remained near the window overlooking the lights of Tokyo. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Claire said, "The first night I met you, everyone thought your gift was Japanese." Simone looked at her. "It was not." "I know." Claire folded her arms lightly. "I thought the remarkable thing was that you understood a conversation my executives did not. And now I think the remarkable thing was that you knew where your understanding ended." Simone smiled. "That is less dramatic. Most useful things are." They stood quietly for another moment. Simone remembered the restaurant in San Francisco. The black apron. The coffee pot. Grant telling her to focus on her tables. She remembered the instant the room turned toward her, shocked that a waitress could possess knowledge no one had thought to ask about. But she also remembered returning to finish her shift. That mattered too. Her value had not begun when Claire noticed her. Her intelligence had not appeared when Hiroshi approved of her Japanese. The fellowship had not created her potential. It had given that potential room to grow. Back in San Francisco, Grant had eventually sent Simone a brief message apologizing for the way he had dismissed her ideas and abilities. She accepted it without pretending the past had not happened. People could change, but change meant more when it arrived without demanding forgiveness as a reward. As Simone prepared to leave the restaurant in Tokyo, the young server from earlier approached and thanked her again for being patient. Simone looked at the tray in the woman's hands and smiled. "You do not have to thank me for treating you with respect." The server smiled back. Claire watched from several feet away. A year earlier, Simone had stood beside a table while powerful people decided what she could possibly know. Now she sat at tables where decisions were made. Yet the greatest change was not the chair, the title, or the language she spoke. She had never been invisible. The room had simply been looking in the wrong direction.